we are going to be ranking roster construction strategies for 2025 Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. I think it's a good way to talk through some thoughts about what happened last season and also how ADP is shaping up this year and how that should affect our strategies. I do want to be very clear about two things. First, almost any strategy, and we'll talk about some strategies that we don't think can work. There's a lot of strategies that can work and can lead to winning teams. I don't think we should be going into a draft necessarily with a, hey, I'm going to execute this strategy here, or I'm going to execute that strategy. So part of it's going to be how the draft falls to you. Balanced builds are certainly fine, and we might not talk about balanced builds here as a strategy, but just balanced builds can certainly win. Our number one strategy for 2025 is hero running back. I think some people call it anchor running back, hero running back. I think what it means is usually take one elite running back, either in round 1 or round 2, and then attack other positions through the rest of the early middle rounds. So teams that end up with Saquon Barkley plus 4 later round running backs, or Bijan, or Gibbs, or Genti, or Henry, or CMC. I'd personally include HN in there as well. I don't know what you guys think about that. But yeah, Herzig, why hero RB as the number one strategy for Underdog in 2025?
Yeah, and for me particularly, I'd even extend it to Bucky Irving, Josh Jacobs, maybe even Chase Brown. So I think like those early third round can definitely fall into this. But for me, this has been my predominant strategy, particularly when, hey, I can grab 2 wide receivers in the first 3 and then stack it with one of those elite running backs. If you grab that elite early on, this allows you to really take advantage of how it's far more likely that running backs can turn into RB1s. They can become the league winners. What we've seen with the Bucky Irving, the Chase Brown last year when they were drafted in those double-digit rounds, it's just so much unlikely for a wide receiver to emerge into a role that can really complement and give you that wide receiver 1 projection. And so if you say, hey, I'm going to take my anchor, my hero RB to begin with, now I only need to find maybe one other breakout running back throughout the year. You're not, if you go with the zero RB, which we'll talk about a little later, you just really need to make sure you're hitting with this one. It kind of is that nice balance of I can really depend on this elite player, which if you look at the first couple rounds, those RBs are valued appropriately. It's not like you have to reach at any point. You're actually getting some values on them. And it allows you to build for those, hey, elite at the other positions, have a strong wide receiver core, and capitalize on those running backs later on that can truly turn into RB1s based off injuries, winning a role, etc.
Yeah. And so I think, Leone, like I execute this strategy a lot, seemingly every year. Like this seems to be my favorite build every year. And I don't know if I'm like adapting it to the year-over-year ADP enough. I think I'm like middling it where I want exposure, like Herzig said, to a running back who can absolutely go nuts. But I also want to execute the principles that I prefer, which is, hey, I want to bet on chaos at the running back position. Backup running backs are much more capable of producing than backup wide receivers are, et cetera. So, Leone, where do you come down on the hero RB strategy for 2025?
I mean, you guys hit on a lot of it. It gives you the best of both worlds where, Pat Crane of Legendary Upside's done a lot of research on, when you do get a legendary season from these top running backs, it can make such a huge, huge difference for you. So you're giving yourself access to that type of ceiling season. But we also know that if you take too many running backs very early, you're going to fall behind at wide receiver. And some of these RBs have like pretty big bust rates early. So you're kind of trying to thread the needle there of getting that legendary ceiling and then also being able to take advantage of chaos with some of your later round picks. I do want to note too, we're recording this in May, and these strategies, in my opinion, shift a little bit through the course of the season. Like right now, I like the hero RB, but maybe even getting 2 earlier running backs and having 5 total running backs. And part of that is, and we'll talk about zero RB in a second, but we just don't know the depth charts at the running back position now, which makes those much dicier picks in the late rounds. Whereas come August, we may have the Bucky Irvings that we feel really good about and we want to keep slamming in our drafts. We don't have the Bucky Irvings right now. A ton of risk in some of those later round running backs, and that'll shade some of my opinions on the strategies we go through.
Yeah, and we have a bunch of other running back strategies to get to. I don't want to cover all the running back stuff now, but the ADP on running backs this year is way different than it's been in the past. And I think that's an important factor. As we move to number 2 strategy for this year in Best Ball on Underdog is fragile running back. What this means is use a lot of our draft capital at running back, but don't take many of them. In other words, start a draft with 3 running backs in the first 4 rounds or something like that, but only end up with 4 running backs on your 18-player roster. And so the idea is we have Bijan, Bucky, Chase Brown, and Scatabo. It's fragile because if those guys get hurt or they fail, we're probably dead. But if they stay healthy and they hit, we are printing. This is a strategy I know Herzig that you used, I believe when you won the first Best Ball Mania, it was a fragile RB team. How do you think that shapes up this year? And I want to make the point here that running backs are going higher than they ever have before, or at least in the last few years than they have before on Underdog.
Yeah, and I want to clarify. I think you have fragile and there's hyper fragile. And a lot of what you described and what won for BBM1 back in the day was that hyper fragile, which really is the stop at 4. And a lot of those are kind of, hey, maybe 2 in the first 3, then maybe another one as you said 4th, maybe it's actually like 6th and 8th round, something like that. But they're all in the single digit rounds for the most part, and it's 4. Fragile RB, I think, kind of takes it a bit wider and says, like, this is what Leone was saying. Let me grab maybe 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds. But then let me do 5. And if I'm going to do 5, I'm probably not going to grab another one until maybe the 8th or 9th. And then again, 2 more in the middle rounds. This allows me to say, hey, these first 2 rounds, I love doing this, especially if I start a draft with Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, because my 2nd and 3rd round running backs, we're looking at like Devon Achane and Josh Jacobs. You're looking at Bucky Irving and Josh Jacobs. There are Chase Brown and such, like strong running backs that can really, yes, there's some question marks. Does Chase Brown keep that volume? Does Bucky Irving keep his end of the season role? But if they can, they have that upside that they can really drive the season. Your other 3 running backs are then being used for 2 core things. One is provide a level of stability for maybe if you have an injury, maybe in the bye weeks, maybe in bad weeks. But more importantly, you still have the flex spot in underdogs half PPR. So you can still say, hey, of these 3 other running backs, hopefully they can fill into my flex. Maybe I can find the breakout. But only devoting those 2 early on allows you still in the middle rounds to get your wide receivers. Maybe you grab an elite QB or elite tight end, but you can still build a strong team and you're not getting, you're not missing the avalanche of wide receivers because you're not spending so much at running back throughout the draft.
I'm seeing a lot of people do this early on, Leone, where they start with 2 running backs in the first 3 rounds this season. What do you think about that strategy for this year, the fragile running back approach?
Yeah, that's probably what I'm doing most is like 2 running backs in those first 6 rounds. It doesn't even have to be super early. I just did one with, Kenneth Walker and Chuba Hubbard, getting them back to back in 5, 6 and still, stopping at 5 running backs. So, but if we're talking about like just bringing it back more to the hyper fragile, like the more extreme version of the strategy where you're taking 4 total and 2 or 3 are very early, a 3rd one's maybe like kind of early and the 4th one is a little bit variable. Just a couple points on that. One, if you are taking those running backs super early, you kind of, especially in like Best Ball Mania, you want to draft as if you're right. So don't take too many running backs total. That's why you stop at 4 here, because if you're taking Saquon Barkley and building a 4 running back team, like let's just admit it, if Saquon Barkley gets hurt and is out for the second half of the season, you're probably just going to lose anyways. So you're better off assuming Saquon Barkley has the type of season that merits a top 3 overall pick, and then you devote more roster spots to other positions. Like wide receiver, quite often in this strategy, you're going to fall a little bit behind on wide receiver early, but you try to make up for that with quantity over quality. You can't totally do it, but you can try to get to 9 wide receivers on a team, 8 wide receivers on a team. So just want to make that point. And then also different strategies mesh better with other strategies. So it's going to be hard to pull off a hyper fragile running back team and take an elite tight end or an elite quarterback, because then you're really screwed at the wide receiver position. So generally, I like marrying my hyper fragile running back teams are quite often 3 tight ends late with 3 quarterbacks somewhat late. And because you're bulking up at wide receiver in quantity sometimes, it does give you a lot more stack flexibility as you draft. You haven't taken an elite quarterback early. You're taking more wide receivers and you're taking them later. So you do have some of that flexibility to let you grab some ADP values and make your stacks work in conjunction with a hyperfragile running back.
My concern with this is what hit last year, right? And maybe we should take a minute to discuss what happened last year. But if you went running back hard and heavy very early last season, you likely had a very good best ball year. They stayed healthy. they outperformed expectation, and they were going later than ever as more people than ever were doing hero RB and zero RB. And so I guess my point, Leone, is that like, I don't want to overreact to last year. I kind of think last year was an outlier. Now you could say that every, like these small samples of one NFL season, and that's what makes best ball so great. They could all be outliers, right? Some of this wide receiver dominance we saw in the years before, or running back injuries in years before, those could be outliers too. I guess my point though is I don't want to overreact to what happened last year and say, oh, running backs early, fragile running back build smashed last year. Let me do that again this year, because now the ADPs have changed and running backs are going even earlier. So any thoughts on what happened last year at the running back position? Do you think that will be sticky? And as a macro NFL thing also, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I've got a few thoughts on it. One, I think last year, if we're taking an L here, and we should take an L, I think at some point in the draft season, we were a little bit too scared about the roster construction data that really lent itself to zero RB, where we weren't like totally anti-Barkley, anti-Henry, but like we probably scaled back a little bit because we were somewhat scared of that roster construction point, where if we would have just kind of trusted what we had originally, we would have been a little bit closer, not totally in on these guys, but not as out. So I think there is some of that we overreacted last year, and then also got an extreme year in the other way, which kind of compounded. And we saw that with the ADPs last year being kind of insane on the running backs and wide receivers. So fast forward to this year, we don't want to overreact just to what happened last year and have the same issue occur. I think what we're doing now is we're a little bit more confident in like, okay, sometimes there just are running backs with volume that are good plays, and we're like okay with that and accepting it. But I do think when you look at the state of the running back position, you've got some younger running backs like Achane, Bucky Irving, that look like they're legitimately talented in good spots and fun offenses. You've got Ashton Genty, one of the better running back prospects and good draft capital. And then you've got some of the stalwarts that are in good offensive spots like Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, CMC, and young. So I think the running back pool might just be a little bit better than it was a few years ago. So I think the ADPs aren't necessarily chasing the roster construction as it is somewhat correctly, adapting to the player pool.
Yeah. Go ahead, Herzig.
I was going to say, I think it's also what's available in those middle rounds. 4 years ago, when we were doing Hyperfragile, you could get wide receivers, like young wide receivers, like Garrett Wilson, his rookie year, I think was going in the 10th and 11th round. And so those wide receivers have all been pushed up. The other is the running backs you could get in the 10th, 11th, 12th round. They had more actual, not just contingency upside, but you had more pass catching running backs. You had more dual backfield where you can get these running backs that can actually, help you out until you get that breakout. We're seeing less of that these times. We're seeing more of the workhorses. And so I think that's where it's not just about what can I get in the early rounds that I want to, but thinking about what am I able to not get, or what am I trying to get in those middle rounds? And that's where if you take 3 running backs early on right now in that hyper fragile, one, you miss out on that, the upside of the Chase Brown, Bucky Irving breakout later on. But also, as we said, you don't have as many rounds to get those wide receivers, because come 10th round, God, you're looking at like you get past Darnell Mooney, it gets quite ugly.
And piggybacking on that, 4 or 5 years ago, Mike Davis was like a 5-6 turn pick. The 5-6 turn pick this year's Kenneth Walker. Like that's a huge disparity in terms of talent at the position. So I do still think that's why I think these ADPs, I don't think are overly chasing last year and more adapting to the player pool.
Yeah, totally agree with all that. The entire landscape of where people take wide receivers and running backs has changed, which is why we've done so much work over the last couple of years on is the running back dead zone dead? Is it still a thing? Does it exist? Our lean has been pretty consistent in the last 2 years. No, that you can still take running backs in the dead zone as long as you're evaluating them properly. My whole thing from last year was like, let's say we played last year out 1,000 times. Are we really sure that Alvin Kamara and James Conner and Aaron Jones would actually be good picks if we played last season 1,000 times? I just don't want to overreact to what I thought was an outlier season from so many running backs in terms of both sustaining health and outperforming expectations. So yeah, but that's not to take an L on it. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say we systemically undervalued running backs who switched teams and went into good environments who we just assumed weren't good. Josh Jacobs, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley. Not that we assumed Saquon Barkley wasn't good, but we had concerns about the pass catching and stuff. There were just backs that we, maybe shorted a little bit too much in new situations. And that uncertainty, a lot of times we want to look at the uncertainty in the way that we like it and we favor it, but it works the opposite way sometimes. And last year it worked in favor of those running backs in new environments.
All right. Speaking of running backs and uncertainty, let's go to strategy number 3 for 2025 best ball and underdog, and that is 0 RB. Now, first let me define it for people. I think different people define 0 RB differently. In my head, the idea is to secure elite quarterback, secure elite tight end, secure a bunch of elite wide receivers, and you do this by not even taking any running backs before roughly round 8, maybe round 9. That's personally how I define it. And my thought was this would be a very good year to do 0 RB because running backs have been pushed up so much versus previous years in ADP. Now, I think what Leone's saying, what we've been talking about, is maybe they are priced more correctly now. But Herzig, what do you think about 0 RB when it applies to this year's landscape?
Yeah, and so for me, 0 RB, I'm going to take it to the first 6 rounds, no RBs, because that allows you to fill up all of your other positions. You could go 4 wide receivers, a QB, a tight end. You could even grab 5. And if you look at the data for this, it's pretty astonishing. For BBM 2 to BBM 4, so 21 to 23, the no RBs for the first 6 rounds, 21% advance rate, which is, hey, you expect your normal advance rate is something around 17, and you're around 50% more likely to actually make the finals. Then, if we just look at last year, the advance rate was 8.5%, and you were 50% less likely to actually make the finals. Now, obviously, it's so biased by or impacted by the players and people who went no RBs. You missed out on the Saquon, the Derrick Henry, the Joe Mixon, the players who had great seasons and high advance rates. You also probably were taking the wide receivers that were getting hurt, that weren't doing great. So, it's so, we just need to make sure that we are so, can't be so biased by just that one season because of what happened with the kind of player performance. But historically, there's actually a lot of signals to suggest that, hey, 0 RB is a decent strategy. So for this year, I still will rank it behind those other two. There's a reason why it's third in this list. I'd rather go hero RB. I'd rather go fragile RB. But if I'm in the 12 spot and, maybe I end up with Brian Thomas and Malik Neighbors because McCaffrey already went and I don't want to take Derrick Henry or something like that. And then again, I'm not going to go out of my way to reach for a running back if I don't love it, because you get that 3-4 turn, you can get a Lamar, you can get a Josh Allen, and you can get another great wide receiver. So right there, you're starting off with 3 wide receivers, 1, elite QB. This sets you up to have a strong team, but I do like this strategy a little more later in the summer, as Leone kind of alluded to, when we have a better idea. Because, hey, right now you can take Marshawn Lloyd in the 17th or 18th just about every time. What information are we going to get that could really move him substantially higher, not counting for Josh Jacobs' injury? But we could at least get more confidence that he's the clear number 2, and they're not going to kind of move in these other guys. So in that situation, that's when I want the Marshawn Lloyds. I want these guys that have more confidence, have that clear number 2, have that clear upside. Yeah. And so that's how I kind of think through this.
I mean, the other issue, Leone, is that people are on these kind of upside running backs more than they were historically. Freaking Bashal Tutin is going 115 overall or something insane. He would be an awesome 0 RB candidate, but I'm not taking him at 115 overall where he's going. And so that's where it starts to get harder for me. I do think, though, that generally speaking, I want to bet on chaos at the running back position. We did not get it last year. But in other words, when there's chaos at the running back position, backup running backs can capitalize on that. If T. Higgins gets hurt, Andre Yoshivach is not giving us great production. But if Zach Moss gets hurt, as we saw last year, Chase Brown turbo smashes. Or if Saquon Barkley gets hurt this year, I would bet on Will Shipley absolutely turbo smashing. And so I still want to bet on this strategy. I just think it's kind of a little bit harder bet to make when you have guys like Tutin going 115. On the other side of the coin, though, running backs are going higher than ever at the top also. So that makes me kind of want to do the strategy more. So I know I'm kind of contradicting myself. Leone, where do you think about 0 RB for this year?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a contradiction, but I think my boring, lukewarm take is I'm going to try all these strategies. And I think you want to have, the toolbox to know when to implement them and how to implement them more so than you need to rank them one over the other. I know others might not agree. There are some people who will draft their whole portfolio 0 RB. They think that's the right strategy. I kind of like to let those early values, dictate where my roster is starting and be flexible and go from there. Now, when we talk about tight end, I will talk about how also knowing what's available later will influence what you do early. But sticking with the 0 RB strategy, Herzig hit it. Like if you are at that turn and you start without a running back in the first 2 rounds, I had a draft where I went Malik Neighbors, Brock Bowers, took Mike Evans in the 3rd round, was the best value on the board. Got a sliding Josh Allen well after ADP in the 4th. This is most likely a 0 RB build that lets me not fall behind at wide receiver. If I keep going wide receiver, I end up with 4 through 6. Well, I still have the elite quarterback, elite tight end. Now I only have to take 2 quarterbacks and 2 tight ends. I've freed up a lot of roster spots. So that's where the strategy is really appealing when you get into these playoff weeks. If you do get the spike week from the tight end or the quarterback without sacrificing points at wide receiver, and you bank, you've made 7 to 8 running back picks. You just need to cobble together some scores. So I think all these can work. One of the challenges in pulling it off, you guys hit, it's harder to do earlier in the offseason because the running back picks later aren't as strong as they will be. It can be tough with stacking as well, just something to note, because if you take 6 wide receivers early, you're not taking a 7th and an 8th. Maybe you're taking a 7th, but if then you get sniped on your quarterback to make the stack, it can be harder to make that work. Whereas some other strategies, you have more flexibility later. So just wanted to point that aspect out. It doesn't mean not to do it. It's just something to be aware of.
If you're going to try to execute 0 RB, identifying which running backs to do it with, I think is important. We'll have our list up for people with the best ball product and Draft Kit Pro product soon about later round running backs to target in 0 RB builds. All right. Strategy 4, 3 later round quarterbacks. Now, I might disagree with Herzig a little bit here. I would actually have elite quarterback ahead of 3 later round quarterbacks specific to Underdog. On DraftKings, I prefer 3 later round quarterbacks. On Underdog, I slightly prefer elite quarterback, but let's stick with 3 later round quarterbacks for now. You often end up with 3 pocketish passers, at least on DraftKings I do, like a Baker, Nix, McCarthy, or May, Herbert, T-Law. And the important thing to me is to get all 3 of these stacked. If you're going to go with 3 mid/late round quarterbacks, I want these to at least be single stacked with ideally wide receiver or tight end options. But yeah, Herzig, I'm surprised that you had 3 later round quarterback ahead of elite quarterback on Underdog. Go ahead on that.
I'd say they're very close together. I think the one that's just really below it is grabbing 2 of the middle QBs for me. I think that's the one that is the least tempting. But for the 3 late QBs, looking at the data, you want to make sure that you have QB1 before round 13. If you end up doing it after round 13, now you've waited too much. You have too much risk with your actual QBs from a job stability, but also it's just difficult to get the upside in those QBs. The sweet spot is really around 9. And for us, that just works out really well with where we also have our rankings. We have guys like Kyler, Justin Fields, Brock Purdy, all as good values in around that 9th round. And so grabbing that as your QB1, sometimes you can either double tap and grab 2 of those and then grabbing a 3rd later. And from an advance rate perspective, yes, elite QB probably is better on Underdog because you get that high upside with the kind of just, mean projection. But we're playing these tournament styles where, hey, we're going for the large contest. We're going to, make the finals. And if you go with the elite QB, we can talk about the downsides of it, but you're just really reliant upon that QB, that game, that stack. When you have 3 QBs, it gives you more kind of opportunity to find the, hey, maybe the lower owned player that has the big game in the playoffs. Maybe you can get a little ping pong of your QBs from those games. That's why I'd say specifically for these contest structures where it's playoffs, big finals, 3 late QB works a bit better.
I guess my counter, Leone, would be it's so hard for these later round quarterbacks to match what the elites are doing. Lamar, Josh, Jaden, and Hurts. Like when they hit, and they are hitting so often these days on Underdog, scoring 30 points on Underdog is like really hard for a pocket passer to do. Really, really hard. 30 points is a huge number on Underdog, and these guys are doing it so consistently. So, Leone, what do you think about 3 late quarterback on underdog versus elite quarterback builds?
I like the 3 late quarterbacks quite a bit. In response to kind of the weekly ceiling at the position, some of that you're getting back just because you've got more quarterbacks, So yeah, Jared Goff's not out there putting up 30 points every week. There's lots of weeks where he scores, 15 and they score a lot of rushing touchdowns. But in a high-powered offense, we have seen him hit a pretty high ceiling. Also, when these quarterbacks hit and it's, you want to stack them, if they have a breakout year like CJ Stroud 2 years ago, a lot of the pass catchers you're taking with them have a huge year as well and a ton of value. Josh Allen might hit his normal ceiling and not take anyone with him. I do think he's particularly good to stack this year, but but some of the other quarterbacks too, they may carry, but they may not. So I think when you hit with one of these pocket passers, it might mean more for your team than when you hit with one of the elites early. Also, Herzig touched on having 3 of them in the playoff weeks. There's an element too with Best Ball Mania where uniqueness matters a little bit in your playoff pods. And I'm generally not one to go out of my way to get unique. I think it's something the field overthinks a little bit too much. But this is an easy way to say, like, I've got Dak, Tua, and Stroud. Dak goes off in week 15. That eliminates a lot of Tua and Stroud teams because a lot of these teams, if they're 2 quarterback teams, they're not going to have these quarterbacks. So now not only do I have 3 stacks to potentially get me through, but 2 of the 3 are probably lower owned in the next round. And we talked a little bit about this time of year being tougher for 0 RB and a little bit better for a fragile RB build. That fits in to say, hey, I don't know who the good late round skill player picks are, but I know who these quarterbacks are. So I can fill more quarterback spots at this time in the year.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I mean, way more easy to be confident about quarterback depth chart this year than any other position. There's no doubt about that. So number 4 strategy was 3 later quarterbacks. Number 5 strategy was elite quarterback. Again, I sounds like I like this a little bit better than these guys do, specifically on underdog. I do it a lot more. And I just think these rushing touchdowns mean so much on underdog, where these guys, Lamar, Allen, Daniels, Hurts, can really break things. Anthony Richardson when he starts as well. Justin Fields as well. So I do like that better on underdog. And I don't mind having some of those guys naked if I have to. It's not ideal, but if I have to, I think that's okay still.
Yeah, I'd agree with you can take them naked. Generally, when I'm drafting these quarterbacks in this range, I will be the one to take the value that falls and then make it work. But I'm probably not spending a lot of teams taking Allen, Lamar, Jaden ahead of ADP.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think just to help people kind of understand with those playoffs, let's say you do go with the Lamar Jackson and he has 2 amazing weeks in week 15, week 16. He's going to, and a really good regular season, he's going to be so high owned in that playoffs, in that final. So if he has another huge game, congrats, you and 30% of the field also have that. With the 3 QB structure, if you have that hit where you hit on the CJ Stroud his rookie year, having a good season, now, week 17, you're not only reliant upon that high-owned CJ Stroud, you have these other 2 guys, the other 2 games that can break out. It's just a more attractive final.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just biased because Bo Nix was my highest-owned quarterback last year, and he smashed, and I still got buried by all the Lamar, Hurts, Allen teams. You know what I mean? I just couldn't keep up, I
had Baker, so,
Yeah, well.
I think there's an element, too, of sometimes we undervalue floor even in these big contests, and just not taking a bad quarterback score can be really big. Just having a decent 20-point score, even when Lamar puts up 30 sometimes, can be enough, and you're more likely to get that when you have 3. I'm probably sounding more I'm not anti-hero QB, but it's coming off that way just I think a lot of the tiebreakers point towards 3 quarterback, which makes me prefer it, but I will definitely have elite QB teams in the mix, but probably 70-30 in favor of 3 quarterbacks.
All right. Let's get to the most controversial strategy of the season, it seems so far, from the best ball community. Number 6 on the list is elite tight end. Now, I have seen arguments both ways from this. I honestly have not formulated my take yet for this year. I've kind of just been rolling with it. If Bowers or McBride slip past ADP, I'm willing to take them. I have not been going out of my way to take them. I know that's really weak right now, and I'm trying to think through it. I'm hoping that this helps here today. Elite tight end, I would consider this year probably only Bowers and McBride. They're very expensive. Bowers going around 15 overall. McBride's going around 23 overall. There are people out there, Herzig, who say you need access to elite tight end scores because when you get to the Best Ball Mania final, you're not going to win Best Ball Mania without getting 20 or 25 points from your tight end. And later tight ends can't do that. I don't really agree with that. Like it's so touchdown heavy. David Njoku can go out and score 3 touchdowns in a game, etc. What do you think about elite tight end here as a strategy for 2025, Herzig?
Yeah, so let's break it up into regular season and then playoffs. I think for regular season, even the elite tight end proponents will kind of agree that it does hurt your advance rate because what you're giving up by having to take a tight end so high up when you compare it to what you can get from production in later rounds with tight ends because it's such a projectable, like you have starting tight ends going in the last round. We do have higher advance rates when you go for the kind of the 3 later tight end strategies versus taking the elite. Now, when you get to the playoffs, this is where most people make their argument is, yeah, okay, so I'm willing to suffer, a little advance rate, but in the playoffs, I have access to these elite games. You look at the amount of the targets, the target share in their teams for McBride, for Bowers, and other tight ends just don't have that. And I get that, and that's fair. But historically, we've also seen like the gap between the elite tight ends and what you get from late tight ends is not actually that large on underdog. Let's be clear. This is an underdog discussion, half PPR. This is not FFPC with, extra premium. This isn't DraftKings where you have the bonuses in PPR. For underdog, the gap just isn't that large. And we have seen late production from tight ends, either with breakout seasons or just being attached to strong offenses. And so for me, we're still working on actually a data project that we're hopefully going to have a little more answers here. But for me personally, the way I stand right now is I'm trying to avoid the elite tight ends on underdog because I just do not feel that their cost is worth it. But as you said, this is a very hot fire topic with people on both sides. Smart people on both sides.
For sure. And this has been a fire topic going back to DFS days. I mean, I was like known, like people like knew me as the guy who never paid more than 3,500 on DraftKings for tight end. And I stuck by that for a really, really long time. And like the idea, Leone, was like tight end score less and it's more unpredictable. It's more touchdown heavy. And so everybody else was out there spending 6,500, 7K on tight end, be like, damn, I got 9 again from tight end. It's a tight end. Of course you can get 9. And I understand you can get 9 from any position, but when there are starting tight ends available to you for 3K in cash on DraftKings, that is very similar to being able to get a starting tight end in the 16th round, in the 15th round, et cetera, on underdogs. So, Leone, where do you come down on elite tight end builds for 2025 on underdog?
Yeah, speaking from a macro perspective, I think there's a lot of time and energy spent on the debate that's like, I don't know if it's solvable, to just say like, elite tight end does or does not have this systemic edge. It's very year dependent. The data is all screwy because like when Travis Kelce has his year, like there are 1 tight end teams that you should never do that have an amazing advance rate. So it certainly can work. We've seen it work multiple years when Kelce went absolutely nuts and really buoy your advance rates. We also saw last year where we didn't really have any of the early tight ends projecting that well relative to ADP, but there were like 6 or 7, and I was always kind of grabbing the one that fell past ADP, and it didn't work out so well because you can see why there's no one going in that range now because all those guys failed and we've reconstrued our value proposition on them. So I wouldn't say I'm actively avoiding it, but I'm definitely more on the 3 tight end side right now. That's more to do with the player pool. I've never seen this tight end, let's call it 10 to 16, 17, 18, even to Pat Fryermuth at T19. I feel like I haven't seen this range so cheap before. It's going in an area of the draft when running back wide receiver starts to die down and get a little bit risky. I think there's legitimate upside. You've got the rookies Warren and Lind going there. Some bounce back candidates and like Kincaid, Kyle Pitts going there. There's also just guys that I just don't, the volume on David Njoku and the setup for Goddard. I just like so many of those tight ends that you can get into rounds 12 to 14 and take 3 of those guys.
Agreed.
And one point I just want to make real quick too. we might have less of a value, a pro ETR value on Warren and Loveland, but sometimes I'll take those guys a little bit earlier than other guys we have ranked, just knowing I can get 3 guys in this room, and archetype wise, I would love to have the rookie upside. In order to get that, I have to take the rookie first,
Yeah.
and then I'll take the volume guys.
I mentioned that, and by the way, there's a new feature up for anyone with the best ball product, player by player notes from me, and I mentioned that, like, some of the strategy stuff. So if you have the best ball product, be sure to check that out. I have notes on almost every player. One positive that I'd say for elite tight end, I don't know how much you guys think this matters, but I kind of think, to me at least, it does. If I take elite tight end, I know I'm only taking 2, and it opens up another roster spot for me. And like, I'm always looking to open up more roster spots, take more shots. So like, let's say I take Bowers. I might not take another tight end until Freiermuth, and that has allowed me not only another roster spot, but a ton more draft capital to spend in other positions. So I think that's kind of a hidden benefit of, maybe not hidden, but a benefit of elite tight end there.
It's 100% is a benefit and something, you know, that deserves to be mentioned. Sorry, go ahead, Justin.
And I think that's going to be more valuable when we get closer to the season, because that 18th round pick right now is Theo Johnson, is these tight ends who I know are starting, where it's such a crapshoot trying to figure out the running back or wide receiver in that later on. So like, I think that value of the roster spot becomes more valuable as we get closer to the season and we have more information on the players.
I'm hesitant to even bring this up, Leone, because it makes me sick to my stomach, but are you willing to do any 4 tight end builds this year on Underdog? You only have 18 roster spots. Are you going to spend 4 of them on this dusty position that everybody gets excited about every year and ends up failing every year, no matter what? What do you think about 4 tight ends this year, Leone?
I think that I'll have a small percentage of teams that are 4 tight end. I don't think this is a never do it strategy. I would never draft 4 quarterbacks. I would draft 4 tight ends in certain circumstances. Again, that this group is so cheap that you can start hitting it in round 13, end up with a few guys from this group. If your last round pick, I mean, these guys can count towards your flex too. It's not like they don't count. And sometimes you're getting like, we're high on the Tua stack this year. If I get Cade Otton as an 18th round tight end, who's a legitimate starter in a pretty good offense, he's probably going to contribute a lot more than, you know, some dust ball wide receiver that has like a 1 in 100 chance of breaking out. And the other note I want to make, I think we talk a lot about like injury rates with running backs, wide receivers. Tight end injury rates are the worst. You know, those are the highest injury rates. And I have no issues taking 4 tight ends if you are starting the position in like rounds 13 or 14.
Okay. Well, I'm not making any 4 tight end teams, so you can leave those to Leone. Okay. A couple that we wanted to end with here that we wouldn't do. So number 7 on the list, double elite quarterback. I've seen some people try to pull off the Lamar plus Jaden teams, or the Josh Allen plus Hurts, or Lamar plus Burrow, or even to me something like Jaden plus Mahomes. I think that is too much. Herzig, if you take an elite quarterback on Underdog, what's the earliest you would take your second quarterback on Underdog?
Yeah, this has never worked when looking at historical data. If you isolate for 2 QBs draft in the first 6 rounds, first 5, first 4, whatever it is, you never even get above a 12% advance rate. And that's really bad. And then the finals rates are even worse, hurting you between like 50 to 75%. So if I'm drafting an elite one, the first one I might go with is probably like that 8th, 9th round. I think definitely that 9th round, because if I win an elite and then I'm also want to go like Justin Fields or Kyler, now I'm grabbing a second QB that's probably stacked and has individual upside. I'm okay with that. It's still a lot of capital, but that's probably the earliest. Really, my elite QBs, like I love Geno Smith. Very stackable. I'm bullish on the offense. Like very high job security. Actually does some on the ground with his legs. Like that's the type where when I have my elite QB, I probably want to wait as far as possible. But yeah, I could convince myself that somewhere around that kind of 9th round, I would grab a second.
I mean, there's plenty of quarterbacks down there that I think have upside this year. I would consider Trevor Lawrence, CJ Stroud, JJ McCarthy, Bryce Young, like as QB2s on elite quarterback builds. I think those make sense. Before that is a struggle for me, Leone. How do you think elite quarterback builds should look at the quarterback position?
I pretty much agree with Herzig. Like normally I am trying to get that range that you mentioned, Adam, like Lawrence, Stroud, Tua, Penix, Geno, I'm trying to get that very stackable, cheap pocket passer, but there are certainly circumstances where if there's just a really big ADP value and you're not spending egregiously at the quarterback positions, I want to take my shot. We're high on Kyler. If we're above ADP on Kyler and he falls half a round behind ADP, no issues like Herzig said. Fields has some legitimate upside, kind of similar dynamic, one of the quarterbacks we're ahead of ADP on. So a ton of this stuff, honestly, you have to be willing to be flexible. It just, when you're doing one of the lower ranked strategies or unranked strategies, you need to be 100% sure you're getting extremely good value on it and you've figured out how to work out the capital to make it work. Whereas some of the other strategies that are higher ranked, you don't need to get that massive ADP value to justify drafting the position because we've already covered why it makes sense from the overall roster construction standpoint.
Number 8 strategy is double elite tight end. This is another one that we would not do, I don't think. Things like Bowers plus Kittle or McBride plus Laporta, or even like Bowers plus, maybe you guys disagree, but for me, even like Bowers plus the Jonnu/Hawkinson tier, I don't think that I would do that either. If I'm taking Bowers or McBride, I'm probably waiting as long as I can for my second tight end. Herzig, what do you think about handling elite tight end build? What's the earliest you would take your second tight end?
Yeah, this one, the only time we've seen it work was in 2022 when Kelsey basically lapped the field. And so double tight end actually had a 24% advance rate. Now, 0% of those teams actually made it to the finals. So what are we going for? But you could have also just drafted Kelsey that year and it had almost an identical advance rate with an above at expected finals advance rate. So in my mind, I'm not touching to, again, this is underdog. DraftKings, I think it's a little more viable. I'm still probably not doing it, but here, the argument for, they can touch your flex. Yeah, you are spending way too much capital if you're trying to hit your flex with a second or third rounder for that tight end when you compare to what you're expected to get from a running back or wide receiver in a similar. So to your question, if I grab an elite one, what's the earliest I would take another tight end? I'm okay with Jonnu just because I saw Jonnu last year in the second half finish as tight end 1 on a per game basis. So I'm looking for pure upside. I would not take Hawkinson. Laporta, their values are from consistency. I'm not looking for consistency when I already have my elite 1. But yes, to your earlier, if I'm grabbing one of those elite, I want to wait very late. Freiermuth feels like a good spot somewhere in that later round.
Leone, any final thoughts here on elite tight end builds?
Yeah, I mean, in an ideal circumstance, you're drafting as if McBride or Bowers have these close to the Kelsey type seasons we're talking about, which means they're hitting your lineup almost every single week. So even though the second tight end can hit your flex, that's not optimally what you're going for. Like I said, the caveats are always, there's 4 things I'm looking for when I draft, like ADP value, our ETR rank value, correlation, and positional need. If you check like 3 out of the 4 boxes, positional need not being one of them, to Herzig's point, I'll take this stacked Jonnu on a Miami Tampa Bay team, after ADP, even though I have an early one. I would be, I did a team where I took like Laporta and Hawkinson. I generally am not drafting those types of teams, but they both kind of fell and had some week 17 correlation. I think that's okay. But those guys obviously are costing way cheaper than if you were to pair one of those guys with Bowers or McBride. And one thing I meant to mention on the elite tight end conversation too, I think the field might be, while I don't have like a hard stance on the strategy, I think the field might be overly chasing like this 99.9th percentile outcome that they feel like they need to have. Like Kelsey has a 25-point playoff game, so you need that. In this case, it's Bowers. Generally, just well-constructed teams get through there, and if you're lucky to stay healthy and let the randomness go through it, there's only so much you can control. So when we're projecting Bowers and McBride, and we have them ranked a little bit behind ADP, people think we don't like them. You go to a full PPR or tight end premium site and we're ahead of ADP with the exact same inputs on those players. Mm-hmm. So there is something that the field is doing on underdog to prop up these players beyond, just what their value proposition is.
Yeah. Okay. I don't even need to spend a lot of time on this, but final strategy, single quarterback or single tight end. I have never myself built one of these teams. Obviously, doesn't make any intuitive sense because every team has a bye and you're going to end up taking a 0 for one of these weeks if you only end up with one quarterback or one tight end. Herzig, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this, but any thoughts on these single quarterback or single tight end builds?
It's just not worth it because the QB2 or the tight end 2 that you could grab at the end of drafts in the last 4 or 5 rounds is far more likely to help your team from an advance rate and then through the playoffs than the likelihood of hitting on that very late round, breaking talent that fits into your lineup. So it's just not worth it. Yes, you can tell yourself a story where it works, but the likelihood is just not worth the cost.
Okay. Leone, any other crazy builds you want to get off your chest here before we check out?
I will never do a solo tight end or solo QB team. I love to try crazy stuff, would never do that. I guess with the hyper fragile RB builds, it's possible you do a 3 running back team if you did them really early. We're talking crazy builds here like that. That might be 1 or 2 out of 150 teams I do. But if you went like, Saquon, Achane, Bucky or something like that, and just called it quits, I think it's possible. You're just basically saying, assuming they don't have any overlapping bye weeks, the 3 stay healthy all year, and you're just going to use their scores and live and die with that.
Yep.
But yeah.
I do want to throw in, because Leone was talking about 4 tight ends. One of the most successful strategies last year was actually 5 tight ends, all drafted in double-digit rounds, 133 of them, and they had a 32% advance rate. I'm not saying, I'm just saying.
That's pro. If you wanted to go that route, draft 4 tight ends. And I think
completely ridiculous. Let's get 5 guys who score 4 points a week. Sounds like a lot of fun. Okay.
Sounds better than your teams last year.
That's for sure. All right. That is going to do it for this look at strategies on underdog roster construction for 2025. We'll be back next time to look at how to beat best ball on DraftKings, which is a very, very different format in terms of scoring, in terms of ADP, in terms of the way that we like to think about it. So stay tuned for that. Tell the people where they can find you on the Twitter machine if they are so inclined here, Herzig.
At Justin Herzig.
At Justin Herzig for all your peak best ball virginity needs. And of course, at 2 hats, 1 Mike for Leone on the Twitter machine. 4 Herzig for Leone. Producer Ryan, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.